orchestra is a very interesting thing, and you can never really predict what is going to happen. You cannot really plan for anything. You can only learn your music and then go in front of the orchestra and see what happens. If they can read your mind and your gestures, it's a very nonverbal thing. I mean, language is important, but most of what happens in the music, in particular between the notes, between the lines, cannot be articulated. And that really all depends on the ability of understanding each other and having this very unexplainable relationship. And so when you work with musicians, you basically work with 50 to 100 or more individuals whose accumulative knowledge is much bigger than your own. And so it needs to be, just because of that, it needs to be a give and take. And so the only real power you have as a conductor is to score, is the knowledge of how everything works together, kind of being the architect, if you want, and recreating what is on the page. Because a lot of things are really evident when they're on page, but if you just have one single part, it's much less evident what needs to happen and how it all fits together. And so I see my role as someone who enables the musicians to play better than they would without me, and than they would on their own, and really just raise them up and encourage them and enable them to play at their best. And when you have a really good orchestra like this in town, I think it elevates not only the community itself, but it gives a certain culture and context to the whole city. I think that an orchestra in many ways is a cultural focal point of the city. We reach so many diverse audiences between the classics and the pops and the education and the outreach concerts, and so we have so many people that we touch, and not everybody comes to the classics concerts, but I think everybody has the chance, and eventually might, with age and maturity and time and financial resources, will find their way to potentially come to the classics concerts, which are, of course, the main meal, if you want, of and the main mission of an orchestra. And so there's a certain gradual, I think, approach to that. So when you're too young, you still hit the bars and you don't really feel like going to the concert. And then you have children, you don't have time whatsoever, then you have to sleep during the concert, so that's no good either. But I think once the kids are out of the house, you hit your 50s, 60s, I think that's when people look for meaningful entertainment and have the time and the resources and the maturity to really appreciate classical music. I think there's a very natural process. Of course, we love to have young people there, and I started going to concerts when I was 10 and 12, and it was just something that we as teenagers just did. But maybe it's just a boys' choir thing. But I loved it, and I loved to give feedback when I was in the audience. I loved to boo when I didn't like it, and so there was no real politeness. And that was East Germany, and we still booed because it makes this interaction much more energetic and interesting instead of predictable. And I kind of try to also, both in my programming as well as my presentation, to kind of avoid predictability in many ways. Also, the way you play music, that you don't have to play it like the last recording you heard. You have to make it your own. And I think all these elements, can make concerts always new, fresh, and exciting.
For me, connecting musicians starts, first and foremost, with having a very clear conception about how you think the piece should go. And getting in front of that group of musicians takes an enormous amount of humility in knowing that they have years of accumulated experience that I'll never be able to reach as a single human being. But I've often found that when you stand in front of an orchestra and you have a very clear conception about the piece that you're conducting and the way that you wanted to lead that music, people will go with you. They'll grasp on to a very clear conception, and they actually preferred to work with a strong conception than, let's say I would just get up and start waving my arms and not be completely sure about where I wanted to take the music. So I found that with a very clear conception, you can accomplish a lot with a great group of musicians. And secondly, you respect what's happening on stage. You respect and you understand that those musicians have spent their lives perfecting their art. Years in practice rooms and alone, working on scales, working on arpeggios, working on difficult passages from the standard repertoire. So my job is to inspire those very highly trained musicians to function as one and to work together as one mind and one spirit and one musical entity to bring forth what I happen to think is the conception behind the piece that's imbued by the composer.
It's important for the musicians and the relationship of the musicians with the music director to be open, to know for the musicians to know that I want the best for them. I want the best for the music, that we come together to pull in the direction of the vision of what the composer wants in terms of the actual content and the work on the stage and in the rehearsals. And ultimately, for us as a community of musicians to really serve the community and to be in touch with what the orchestra represents for the greater community of the city and of the state. It's important for me to have a very healthy relationship, knowing what an orchestra needs at the time, what it's going through, both individually and as a group, to be able to identify what are the things that need to happen in order to improve this organization and improve the orchestra. And I think that will be key for growth. The accessibility, transparency, and trust, something that we try to create through the music. Music is given to us because it cannot happen without trust. It cannot happen without commitment and without a mutual understanding that we would like to do the best we possibly can to get these sounds out the way composers have intended. And so for me, it's a real joy to be part of that procedure of building community through the growth of an orchestra and through building trust and transparency within the organization.
I think classical music is relevant today because it forces us to listen and to experience music in a different way, in a way that's different from the way that we conduct our lives. I mean, if you think about it, we spend a lot of time on personal devices and we're racing from one thing to the next. And the great thing I think about classical music and the thing that it has going for it is that it really demands that you give yourself up. It demands that you take some time to sit, to turn off your devices, to appreciate, to enjoy, to absorb, and to listen deeply. And I think the great thing about the music is that there's such a richness and a depth and a complexity to classical music that if you give of yourself, if you really give yourself over to that experience, you're going to reap an enormous reward, and you'll be able to experience something that you wouldn't be able to, let's say, if you were just listening to something in the car or passing by or something on the street. That's what I love about this music, is that it demands a lot of me and it demands a lot of listeners, but at the end of the day, it also benefits, it gives enormous benefits, and there's so much that you can reap from an experience when you give yourself over to a great performance of a great piece of music.
I believe an orchestra has the opportunity to be the center of life, of cultural life, of inspiration for a community, of a city. The role of a modern orchestra is to not simply play the great pieces of music of the heritage of the world extremely well. There are a lot of orchestras who can play extremely well these days. It's much more important for a modern orchestra to be able to make that relevant, to make it palpable, to make it come alive in the community that the music is presented and that the orchestra is in, to make it understand that we're not just here for entertainment, we are here to build a relationship that goes much deeper, where people feel I'm going to step into a concert, or I'm going to be part of an event that is with musicians of the orchestra, where they feel anything can happen now. I feel safe, I feel filled with joy, and I feel inspired, and it's for all ages. So the modern orchestra has the opportunity to mean that for the community, to be able to reflect what it's going through. And I'm not just saying on the surface, I'm saying quite deep down on a profound level, and that includes challenges, and it includes celebrating the moments that the community is celebrating. And so part of that, of course, is celebrating the heritage of music, looking forward, building repertoire, doing things that perhaps no other orchestra will do, and certainly being open-minded and being in dialogue with the audience, and giving them a glimpse of what the richness of music can bring to a community when it's exposed to live concerts.